what's coming.
A white shepherd leading a brown Sammy.
Perhaps we should, Doesn't the New Testament say if your enemy strikes you on the right cheek, offer him the left?
Well, I think perhaps the phrase was used metaphorically. I don't think that...
I'm not so sure. I have thought about it a great deal, and I suspect he meant you must show courage. Be willing to take a blow, several blows, to show you will not strike back, nor will you be turned aside. And when you do that, it calls on something in human nature, something that makes his hatred for you decrease and his respect increase. I think Christ grasped that, and I have seen it work.
This is Criteria. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to the show. This is Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast, and I'm James Majewski here with my friend Thomas Miras. Hey there, Thomas.
Hey.
And I got to say, today is a first in Criteria history. It's got to be a first. I don't have any notes in front of me, and instead Thomas has just pages and pages of notes in front of him about this film that we're talking about today.
And most of my notes are multi-paragraph quotes
Yes.
from other people, which I will be reading all of.
But the first sentence in these notes just says, bunch of white women who add nothing.
Before we get to today's film, though, do you want to talk about your latest triumph of the stage?
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. Well, if you listen to Catholic Culture audiobooks, then you'll already be aware that last weekend, this was the weekend of May 21st and 22nd, I performed a about 45-minute long theatrical adaptation of one of Paul Claudel's five great odes. This was the third ode, titled Magnificat, and you can listen to that ode on Catholic Culture audiobooks. You can also listen to Thomas's excellent interview with translator Jonathan Geltner, whose translation of the five great odes I used in this performance, and with whom I corresponded a bit on the performance. But anyway, yeah, this was a 2-night engagement here in New York City at a church in West Harlem, and it went really, really well. You know, at the outset of this project, I really didn't know what it was going to look like. In fact, I chose this project in part because it would be an experiment for me. For a long time, I've been interested in poetry in performance. I think this is because of my background with classical theater, particularly Shakespeare. I mean, that's all poetry and in verse. But I think that with contemporary writing, for the stage, there's a lot less poetry in there, or if it is, it's more of like a postmodern kind of degenerate form of poetry. And so for a long time I've been looking for a poet or a set of poems that would lend themselves to a dramatic, not a dramatic reading, but like a dramatic realization. The idea being, or the hope being, that theater could be leveraged in such a way as to provide another kind of avenue into engagement with the poetry. And so that was the experiment with this piece. I think it went really well. The first night was just an amazing response, really well attended, and just one of those nights when you can feel it as a performer that like everything is just, all the pistons are firing.
Yeah.
And
that's the one that I saw.
Yeah. And I've seen several theatrical performances, you know, perhaps like 2 or 3, maybe 4, where at the end there's just like this silence that nobody dares break with applause. And I've been on the receiving end of that as an audience member, and it's been moving every time. But I've never been in a performance actually on the other end where that was the case. And at the end of this performance, it was just sort of darkness and this single sanctuary lamp that was left lit. So the space is only illuminated by this red lamp, really suggesting, because this was performed in the basement of a church, that right next door is the true presence. and it was just silence, and that silence persisted for quite some time.
Yeah.
And that was very remarkable and humbling for me because, you know, at a certain point I got uncomfortable and I just wanted to be out of it.
And I wasn't sure when to start clapping, and but I was fine with that. But it was appropriately, it was your wife who was like, okay, now it's time to. she was the one who began the moving on to the next phase.
Yeah. So that was great. The second night was also great, another great response, but I will say that it was the vigil of Pentecost. And so there was this Spanish praise band in the church playing the whole show.
It was quite loud.
You could hear it very clearly. And then at one pivotal moment where the performance played a lot with silence. And at one particularly silent moment, there was just a woman like belting in tongues like through this microphone
in the church above.
And I just thought, you know, man, God has got a real sense of humor. But yeah, thanks be to God, that performance went well. And I kind of reflected afterwards too, that like, thanks be to God that was the second performance and not the first.
Right.
Because if that had been the first, and this just speaks to my weakness as an artist, but if that had been the first performance, I would have been really discouraged. And I would have really felt like this experiment didn't work. And again, this speaks to my weakness as an artist, because I don't know, I think that for me, a lot of the times I don't really know what it is that I have until I get it in front of people.
Right.
And perhaps that's a deficiency, you know, like maybe ideally I would know what it is I'm offering to people, but especially with live performance, it's so hard to really have a grasp of that.
And this was prepared in a pretty short amount of time too.
Yeah. I mean, I've been sitting on this text for a while, but really it was just a matter of a couple weeks where I finally, like, the rubber hit the road and I slapped it together. But now that it's built, now that it's done, my hope is that it will travel to other places, perhaps other churches, schools, theater spaces. It's a very it's an easy rig, very minimal in its design. It's just me performing it. So if any of our listeners, you know, want to solicit a one-man performance of French Catholic poets, great ode.
Well, I mean, it was great. It was a great performance. People were really it was a virtuosic, like, that you held people's attention for that long.
Oh, thanks.
Given the way you just described the piece, you know, and I know that I've been seeing James do theater since, you know, we were in high school, basically. And, you know, I know it was the fruit of a lot years of study and ambition, and it was a great success. And it was, I'm very proud of you.
Thanks, Thomas.
It was the best thing I've seen you do, for sure.
It was the best thing I've done, for sure. Thanks be to God. I woke up the next morning just so full of gratitude, because this was an experience that was given to me by God, totally unmediated by a casting director or another person's vision or another producer or something. There was a group of artists here who encouraged me and who supported me in this and who helped to realize it. But this was just between me and God, you know. I think that for actors, so often the sense is that I have to serve another person's vision. I need to serve another person's agenda. And a lot of times you do, but that can't be it for the actor, I think. Because where's the integrity, or where's your agency in that, especially when you're in a cultural moment where the art form is so degraded? You know, I think that, you know, I came here to New York City from Los Angeles, and the entertainment industry out there is just totally debauched. I don't want to go on a tangent here, but for a long time I've been thinking about how can, you know, a Catholic artist, a Catholic actor, really interface with this industry. I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to do so. There might have been a time when you could be like a Mark Wahlberg kind of behind the scenes, you know. Certainly there's been a long history of Catholic involvement in Hollywood, but increasingly it's becoming something where I don't even know if if that level of involvement is possible anymore, in good conscience. I might be overstating it, but anyway, the point is that this experience was incredibly artistically gratifying. I learned a lot in the process. I know I grew as an artist, and I know that I had something original to offer, and that was something that was just me stepping out in faith with God and trusting Him and trusting the gifts that He had given me, that He has given me, and the opportunities that He's put in my path. It had nothing to do with me hustling or bowing to a politically correct agenda or compromises, that the industry might ask of someone to do before they can be in a position to offer something to others,
Right.
And so that was a lesson for me too.
Yeah. Okay, so let me set the stage for you. I had the singular honor of attending an early private screening of Gandhi with an audience of invited guests from the National Council of Churches. At the end of the 3-hour movie, there was hardly, as they say, a dry eye in the house. When the lights came up, I fell into conversation with a young woman who observed reverently that Gandhi's last words were, "Oh God," causing me to remark regretfully that the real Gandhi had not spoken in English, but had cried, "Hi Rama, oh Rama." "Well, Rama was just Indian for God," she replied, at which I felt compelled to explain that, alas, Rama, collectively with his 3 half-brothers, represented the 7th reincarnation of Vishnu. The young woman, who seemed to have been under the impression that Hinduism was Christianity under another name, sensed somehow that she had fallen on an uncongenial spirit, and the conversation ended. I wanted to read this to introduce the film we will be discussing today, Gandhi, from 1982, directed by Richard Attenborough, starring Ben Kingsley as Gandhi. And that quote was from a long essay that was written shortly after the release of that film by one Richard Grenier, which I will return to later in this discussion. But
yeah, well, so we chose this film in part because of our conversation on the last episode when we
2 episodes ago, yeah.
That's right. That's right. On JP, when we talked about John Paul II.
That's right.
That there are a number of films on the Vatican film list that we're not exactly looking forward to watching. And I shouldn't say it's because we think any of them are going to be bad. In fact, this film I thought was one of the more enjoyable of the films that we've watched recently. Mm-hmm. But it's just because
it's pretty easy to watch for a 3-hour film.
Totally. But yeah, for one reason or another, there are some films that we keep putting off. This was one of them. And we decided, what? We're not going to put it off. We're going to just dive right in.
Yeah, because, if there's a bunch of films we don't want to watch, and let's say we don't end up liking them very much, I don't want to first of all, pack them all to the end of our Vatican film list exploration. And also, I don't want to end on like a bum note.
Yeah, totally.
With this list.
Yeah,
so.
And I think it was appropriate, too, that we take on Gandhi. Because we just did a biopic, watching the John Paul II film. Yeah. And so Gandhi, like that film, named also for just John Paul II, right, belongs to this category of film, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. But for those who aren't, it's a biopic. It's a biography movie.
Right.
But not that I've seen a ton of these, but I feel like you can't be a casual consumer of film and not have seen at least a handful of biopics.
Yeah.
But they all kind of have the same kind of flavor to them.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And in my experience, granted, most of the biopics I've seen have not been such massive epic productions as Gandhi.
Yeah.
John Paul II or, Clint Eastwood's Bird or, this movie about Oscar Wilde I saw a couple of years ago called The Happy Prince. They have a tendency to sort of like not feel super cohesive.
Uh-huh.
Especially like the bigger the life is, the bigger the story is.
Right.
And I will say, putting the content aside, this film is certainly one of the best crafted biopics in terms of writing and and flow.
Right, I will
I've
agree.
seen.
And so if that is the reason why it's included on the Vatican list, that this is, kind of representative of this form, the biopic form, which has come to predominate in film, especially in Hollywood film. It seems like every Oscar season there is one of these kinds of movies that's released about some sort of historical figure and starring some, A-list actor.
Right.
And it's what we would call Oscar bait.
Or a white elephant film is another term that I just learned for this.
Do you know what that comes from?
I don't know. I mean, I've heard the expression white elephant before.
Yeah.
But I have to say I can't remember what it means.
If any of our listeners know, jump in on the comment section.
I've forgotten now. I feel like I've heard of a white elephant party, which has to do with like gifts. Something unusual with gifts.
I think that's like a Christmas thing, like where you steal gifts from each other or something.
Yeah. Well, that's what was called a Yankee swap in The Office.
Right.
But maybe that's also White Elephant Party. Very interesting that we're talking about Gandhi. Elephants. He rides an elephant in the movie. Yankee swap. Wait. No, the Brits aren't Yankees.
No.
Never mind. But they we'll just call them Yankees.
They're
for the
white.
Purposes they're white, so they're Yankees. They're Yankee colonialists.
No, they're white, like white elephant.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So anyway, now that we've firmly established our idiot credentials here, it's also been described as like one of the last Hollywood epics.
This film.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, it is. I haven't seen Lawrence of Arabia. It's been compared with that.
But this comes after Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, it does.
It is. It's an epic film, certainly.
Now, didn't David Lean direct Lawrence of Arabia?
Yes.
Now, David Lean was originally wanted to make a Gandhi movie.
Oh.
And in fact, he was originally going to direct this and have Richard Attenborough, who did direct it, star. But this was a project that was decades in the making. Richard Attenborough had wanted to make a movie about Gandhi since like the 50s or 60s.
Huh.
And there were just circumstances that got in the way, not being able to get it produced, etc., political things. And finally, the Indian government kind of was able to help out and get this, because this is a joint UK-Indian production.
Right.
In fact, the Indian government paid for at least a third of the production costs of this film. I think something like $5 million.
Wow.
So, or more. So that has led some people to, Richard Grenier repeatedly refers to it as a paid advertisement for the Indian government.
Sure.
So that's part of the picture that we can get into.
I see.
But,
yeah. Well, it's interesting that you brought up Lawrence of Arabia, because that was a film that I thought of a few times while watching this.
Yeah.
Not just because of the epic quality of this film. I mean, there are some shots where we get, Gandhi marching to the sea through these Indian towns, and he's just followed by hundreds of people, and very, very effective.
There was even talk of having Alec Guinness play Gandhi.
Oh, cool.
In this film. Yeah.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let's just real quick say that Ben Kingsley, aside from giving just a masterful performance in this role, is also Indian himself, actually. That's right. I didn't realize that. Yeah. I thought, here's just another example of some British actor, being cast in, but
and he was relatively unknown, I believe, when this came out.
Really?
He wasn't completely unknown, but I think he was pretty much an up and comer.
Wow.
Which is kind of amazing that they found him, and maybe it helped that maybe they were limiting themselves to Indian people of Indian or partial Indian descent, but
right.
I mean the level of it feels like the performance of a seasoned actor to me.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is.
The level
really
of amazing. I've seen virtuoso performances by young actors, but this feels like a very mature and complete performance.
That's right.
Insofar as working with what he had, the aspects of Gandhi's personality that were allowed to make them their way on screen.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. The reason I thought that the comparison with Lawrence of Arabia was interesting, because I think that both of these films on some level are a way for the British people to understand themselves and their relationship to these old British colonies.
Right.
I think that a film like Lawrence of Arabia, or even like Gandhi, I don't think would get made today. Or if it was made today, it would be like very, very different. And certainly you wouldn't see I don't even think you would see Ben Kingsley playing Gandhi. You know, Indian descent aside, I think that the fact that he's British at all, it would already be off the table, you know? But then certainly Lawrence of Arabia, it's like, well, that story wouldn't even be allowed to be told, you know? So forget casting that at all. But I think that in both instances, what's kind of really important, I think that a film like this gets made at all, is that it becomes a way, I think, in like the popular consciousness to like grapple with this complicated history of colonialism and British influence in these other countries, which, you know, let's, like, to be fair, say had some good things about it and some bad things about it, you know? And I think that in both of those films, you see a kind of grappling with this. And I think that there's actually a symbolic power in having a British actor play this role, you know? I think that for a people, there's something significant in casting one of our own. And it's great, too, that he has Indian heritage, but casting one of our British actors in this role, that there's a kind of integration and a kind of healing that happens, you know? I think that something similar happens with Lawrence of Arabia. Maybe we'll talk about that film on this podcast someday, because we've certainly mentioned it enough times. But just the last point that I wanted to make on this was that even when you're watching a film like Lawrence of Arabia or Gandhi, and when it gets critical of the British government, you know, or when it highlights these injustices or atrocities committed by the British colonial powers, it's still being reflected through the lens of the British self-awareness, right? There's like an act of self-reflection that's taking place.
Right.
Because we're a Western audience watching this, right? You know, I'm identifying myself with the British in this case because this is like part of my history too, you know, not specifically, but more generally as like a son of the West. But what's reflected in this film are Western values, you know, what's playing upon our heart watching this film as an audience, and what gets us excited or what gets us incensed is a Western response, right? This is a Western film made for Western audiences. And so that too is kind of like an important act of...
Well, it is, but also by the Indian government.
Sure, well, but I mean, but it's I think funded by the Indian government is different than made by the Indian government.
Well, yeah, but they were like consulting on the script. Like the Indian president was consulting on the script. It was like very much involved in the conceptualization of the film.
Fine.
But you're right. But that doesn't necessarily go against what you're saying. I mean, it certainly was received by an international audience, very well received. But you know, the fact that this film is appealing to Western values is indisputable.
Right.
So it's a question of what did the Indian government want us to, in what light did they want us to see Gandhi as well? That's mainly what I'm...
Yeah, fine. Yeah. So that doesn't go against what I'm saying here is that like, I think that, you know, that it's all the more unfortunate then that we're not able, if my hypothesis is correct, like if my thesis here is correct, that we're not able to make films like this anymore, then it's all the more our loss, not just from the artistic, accomplishments that are missed out on, but also like the real socio-political efficacy of making a film like this in sort of processing your history.
Right.
Now, like specific historical accuracies or inaccuracies aside, you know, this is clearly a way, I think, for a people to sort of like collectively grapple with the question, you know?
Yeah.
And this film is, as much as it's made from the perspective of Gandhi, right? It's also made from the perspective of the British peoples, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of, that's like my soapbox
Yeah,
there.
that makes sense
at
to
the
me.
outset. Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is on the Vatican film list. We mentioned from the beginning. I've been saying, why did they put Gandhi? Why, oh, why did they put Gandhi on the Vatican film list? It makes no sense. This is not universally considered one of the all-time cinematic greats. It might be considered that by people who don't know that much about cinema, but it is. It feels very much like it was put on here because it's a movie about Gandhi.
Yes. Right.
Not because of its pure cinematic qualities. And in fact, the cinematic qualities of this film are fine. It's a well-made film. It's well directed, not particularly remarkably directed.
Right.
I wouldn't say. There's nothing very memorable about the style of it, about the photography or anything. But it's really the subject matter, I think, that gains its place on the Vatican film list. But to understand is not necessarily to forgive. So there's many admirable traits that Gandhi has, but he also is, and I'm gonna set the title of this episode in stone now. He also is the patron saint of boomers. I one of my old roommates had a book, a big library, and one of the books in the library I remember picking up was a book by Robert Ellsberg, who happens to be the head of Orbis Books, which is a known publisher of liberation theology, gobbledygook, and very boomer press, and that book, quite popular book from I think 97 or 98, called All Saints, and it's kind of like a guide through the year of different saints to meditate on them. So you've got, Catherine of Siena, you've got Saint Hildegard of Bingen, you've got Saint Francis of Assisi, you've got Saint Benedict, you've got Martin Luther, you've got Gandhi, et cetera. So I remember picking up this book and seeing Gandhi, and I'm like, I don't care how awesome this guy was. He's not a saint. Yeah. He's just not.
Right.
I mean, I hope he is now, but you know what I'm saying. So it's just very like, this is like the framework that I have in my mind for explaining the fact that a film about Gandhi is on the Vatican film list.
And also this also is part of what makes the film work to the degree that it does, is that the film isn't really just about Gandhi. It's also about principles, but you have to question sort of to what degree the principles that are reflected are actually those that were.
So it's like, it's the man for all seasons for Gandhi, in that sense.
How so?
They're both about, the classic guy who stands up for his principles against all odds. And, that.
And we talked about that film, A Man for All Seasons, and how the principles that are articulated in that film, and by extension in the play on which the film is based, may or may not have been precisely the principles as understood by Thomas More, right? So I think the same question holds here watching Gandhi, because, just like I said, that this film is not just from the perspective of Gandhi, but it's also from the perspective of the British peoples, like reflecting on this period of time and upon this character and understanding themselves somehow, through Gandhi as a proxy, right? I think that there is a kind of danger that you might end up projecting your own Western values or notions onto this historical character, and in this act of understanding yourself via this situation, right? So
by the way, when I said Martin Luther, I didn't mean Martin Luther King Jr. I meant Martin Luther, although Martin Luther King Jr. is also included in the All Saints book.
And also not a saint. Of course, I hope he's included among the saints, but...
Yeah. So, I mean, projecting values, true, but also there is this tendency in the past, century and a half in the West of idealizing Easterners and Eastern values, both idealizing them as against Western values while simultaneously transmogrifying them
exactly
into
Western,
our Western image of an ideal Eastern saint.
Right.
And this is a very old story in modernity.
I wonder what the first instance of this is, like, documented. You know,
I don't know if there's like any particular figure, but like
it's definitely been in vogue for a while.
You know, theosophy and
one of the things that I couldn't stop thinking about while watching this film was that Netflix documentary Wild Wild Country. I haven't seen it. Yeah, well, it's about this like Indian guru who comes to the United States and starts this commune, and they're like this freaky cult. And of course, you know, so many of the followers are precisely these sort of like disaffected Western youths who are, you know, trying to find this ideal of Eastern purity, you know, by following this Eastern spiritual master, you know. And anyway, I feel like watching that documentary casts a film like this in a different light, you know.
I recently watched a documentary series on the Criterion Channel called Phantom India. I think it's like a 6-part documentary series by this French filmmaker Louis Malle, who directed a film on the Vatican film list, which we'll be watching at some point in the future, called Au revoir les enfants. And it's just him and his crew going around India with minimal comment, filming scenes from Indian life and talking to people and stuff. And occasionally, like every episode, there's like an update on the activities of like the various communist parties in India, because Louis Malle was a commie. So there's like undue space given to the activities of communists in India, which apparently there's more of that than I would have realized. But in fact, just as a tangent, the Catholic part of India, Kerala, the communist parties are the dominant parties, but they're not Catholic. So it's this kind of weird thing. But there's never been a revolution in India because the communists have never had that much influence. So they've had to compromise and do things the old-fashioned political way, you know, rather than just killing everybody.
Right.
Yeah. So that I also had this documentary series in my mind as I was watching this, and you know, this film was filmed in India, and it looks, the biggest difference, you know, a lot of it looks like it could be from that documentary series, except that there's way less deformed people and like seriously ugly people.
Interesting.
In this, and like toothless people in this film, because I don't think they were just grabbing people off the streets for well, they had a lot of extras that they could have been, but they didn't show you like the full extent of suffering.
Even in this, there's a scene where Gandhi is sort of traveling through this poor district, and he sees the poverty that the Indian people are living in.
They're all like pretty normal looking.
Yeah, it doesn't even look that bad. There's like a woman like breastfeeding, and I guess that's like
The fact that there's a woman breastfeeding in public is an indication of like the direst straits of poverty.
Right. So
just looking vaguely desperate, but she actually looks fine.
Right. Yeah. So it is kind of interesting because, in fact, I think he's in Calcutta, which, of course, I might be misremembering that.
He goes there later. I don't remember where is it that he comes when he first comes back to India from South Africa. That's where that scene takes place.
But yeah, of course, Calcutta, where Mother Teresa went, to serve the poorest of the poor. I mean, if you see any images of her mission there, I mean, it's just like devastating. The images of poverty. Nothing like that is shown in this film. Yeah.
So why don't you tell me, James, about, because I read, there's a famous essay and a number of critics of the portrayal of Gandhi in this film, not just from a number of them being kind of Western conservatives who object to like the pacifism element. And that includes Richard Grenier, who I quoted earlier. He wrote an essay which later turned into a book called The Gandhi Nobody Knows. But this film was also criticized by a number of Indian commentators as being historically or politically inaccurate in various ways. So I read this essay years ago, and I read it again last night after watching the film. And I'm just curious, before we could kind of get into the historical accuracy aspects of the film, I want to know what you came away from when you watched this film as to who Gandhi was and what he was all about.
Well, I basically came away from this film thinking, dude, Gandhi, what a cool guy. And there was an element to this film that was like a healing balm for me, because it's so not the way politics is handled nowadays, right? Like, I feel like every BLM leader should just like sit down and like watch this film, and just have to like grapple with the ideas of nonviolence or non-cooperation that are espoused in there, because one of the things that I thought was most moving was the insistence on the part of Gandhi in this film, the character of Gandhi, to not to basically act prudentially with a view to the long-term consequences of certain actions, right? So Gandhi in this film is portrayed as saying on several occasions, like, I don't just want to win Indian independence, or I don't just want to, see this particular situation resolved. It's going to be the character of that resolution on the other end, right? The quality of it.
Yeah. Both having to do with morals and having to do with culture.
Right. So it's not enough, young BLM activist listening to Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast, right? It's not enough to just like win your victory or like, affect the kind of change that you're looking for, but it's what are the seeds that you're sowing along the way, right? This was what I was reflecting on watching this film, just thinking like, man, there is just so little moral prudence in the way that these social activism is conducted nowadays. And I would think that many so-called social activists nowadays, civil liberties activists or whatever, would point to a figure like Gandhi or certainly like Martin Luther King Jr. As being kind of emblematic of the ideals that they're trying to carry forward. But I guess watching this film made me realize, one, how little I actually knew or know about Gandhi.
I didn't remember that he had been assassinated until I watched this.
Me neither. Film. The only thing I knew
Nobody talks about his assassination. Everybody talks about King, Kennedy,
right?
Even Malcolm X, but nobody in the West is like, I remember the day. Gandhi was killed.
Yeah, well, maybe because he was killed by a Hindu nationalist. But anyway, it's one. I didn't know anything about Gandhi coming into this film other than like an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind or something,
Right.
But
be the change that I want to see in you, as our old friend Luke Fontana tweeted once, which I thought was very funny.
An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. I believe that wholeheartedly.
No, it doesn't. There'll be one guy left with one eye. How's the last blind guy gonna take out the eye of the last guy left, who's still got one eye? All that guy has to do is run away and hide behind a bush.
Gandhi was wrong. Just that nobody's got the balls to come right out and say it.
But then, two, how worthwhile it would be for us in our day to maybe reflect on and reclaim some of these more principled or thought out notions of civil disobedience, as a tactic. Not just for extremists who are out there like burning and like rioting, but also for those of us who are considering civil disobedience along different lines, especially with regards to the nonsense that's being perpetrated in the midst of in the wake, I should say, of last year's pandemic. It's over. It's over. But certainly like the political machinations and the absurd power grabs are not over. And so so thinking about civil disobedience or about non-cooperation, it would seem to behoove us, to think about this, and looking at a character like Gandhi might be a helpful way of doing that. So those were my main takeaways, right?
It's super interesting that you mentioned Gandhi, the specific fact that he was killed by a Hindu, like radical Hindu. I don't even know what that means, what the correct term is, but Hindu nationalist, maybe somebody who didn't like Gandhi was very Hindu, but he was more moderate in certain respects. And my understanding is that he was killed by a more extreme sort of Hindu party member.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned Malcolm X. Malcolm X is somebody, some people have gotten really into Gandhi. I have gotten really into Malcolm X at points in my life. So I've been a big admirer of his. Never called him a saint, by the way. Never decided that he was a saint, but I love Malcolm X. I admire many things about him. And Malcolm X, there was a guy who recently claimed on CNN that Malcolm X was, killed by white supremacists, which is a conspiracy theory. Because Malcolm X was killed by a member of the Nation of Islam, which he had left and begun to criticize. So Malcolm X was killed, like Gandhi, by a more radical member of his own cause, in a sense.
Right.
And Malcolm X was killed for not being racist enough against white people,
right?
In part,
right?
And which is really interesting in
right.
itself. And Gandhi was killed partially for being a peacemaker, you know? So that's very interesting in itself to compare the two in that respect, because there's this like kind of people trying to rewrite, the Malcolm X story. No, he was killed by like Louis Farrakhan, like has basically admitted to being behind the death of Malcolm X.
Yeah.
So
right.
It's kind of a side point, but it's interesting to compare those.
Well, before we move into more of the historical nitty gritty, I'll say that a third sort of big takeaway for me in watching this film, one of the big things that I got out of it was just reflecting on our Lord, reflecting on the Gospels. There's a couple of instances in the film where the character of Gandhi references the New Testament. And certainly anything you find in the best of what Gandhi has said, you'll find in Jesus, right? So Jesus is the definitive act of non-cooperation, right? With evil, right? Try as hard as he might, Gandhi was not able to not cooperate with evil on some level. Jesus never cooperated with evil. But another part where this came through was with Gandhi's repeated hunger strikes, and how the violence being perpetrated by others was taking a toll, to the death,
right,
on this person, right? That there was something in, the particular morality of hunger strikes aside, which I don't know anything about, there was something in this dynamic whereby people were able to see their own evil actions in a different light by looking at them reflected in the suffering of this person, right? This person whom they loved. And I thought, man, dang, that is totally our relationship to Christ, right? We are all crucifying Jesus all the time with our sins, and that if the suffering of Gandhi in this self-imposed fast is capable of putting an end to violence, of putting an end to the beginnings of a civil war in India, then certainly the suffering of Jesus is efficacious in putting an end to our evil, and so this was a very moving point of meditation for me coming out of the film. But it was also something that kind of bothered me about the film, right? Was that when I saw you later that day after mass, and we were talking about the movie a bit, and you mentioned some of these like complicating historical facts about Gandhi and inaccuracies in the film, I think the first thing I said to you is, oh, well, that's a relief, and that might seem like a odd thing to say, but I was genuinely relieved to find out that this man was not in fact Jesus, right? and that the film kind of suspiciously, leads you to believe that suspiciously suggests that this man is more Jesus than Jesus,
So we can start heading towards, some of the issues with this film in terms of accuracy, but, it's worth talking about that. The film stresses basically, for the most part, it stresses everything that Westerners would find appealing about Gandhi and leaves everything that they would find unappealing. More or less. Yeah. Westerners might not find hunger strikes appealing to do them, but they find it appealing. They find it nice to think about someone else doing it. Yeah. Westerners, maybe they're not so crazy about the part where he and his wife reenact their wedding vows, and she says he's her sovereign lord, which I thought was awesome.
That was awesome.
But it's like a different culture. I
watched this film with my wife, by the way, and she was so pumped at the portrayal of Gandhi's wife, like how she's portrayed as being like totally supportive.
She
of
said,
him.
"I find my dignity in following my husband."
Something along those lines. And like my wife was so stoked at that. Yeah, and that's one thing that I will say for the film is like good for them for not shying away from that.
Now, in reality, there might be some problems even there. Yeah. But so let's praise Gandhi a little bit. I mean, Gandhi was he was educated in England. He was very intrigued by Christianity and especially the New Testament. He ultimately refused to accept that Jesus was sort of personally the way of salvation. Much in the way that like a Jordan Peterson hasn't been able to accept that. Right. But I wanted to read a comment that he made in the Sistine Chapel when he saw a painting of the crucified Christ. What would not I have given to be able to bow my head before the living image of Christ crucified? I saw there at once that nations like individuals could only be made through the agony of the cross and in no other way. Joy comes not out of infliction of pain on others, but out of pain voluntarily borne by oneself. Wow. So that's a remarkable statement for anybody to be able to say, even if it is too much of an ideal.
Yeah. It sounds just like something Peterson would say.
Yeah. Now we could talk about this film really emphasizes his interest in Christianity, his being inspired by the Sermon on the Mount, and his sort of syncretistic attitude in general. Yes. Right. Now, Gandhi was not a syncretist, but on the level of philosophy, on the level of moral ideals, Gandhi was a Hindu. He did not practice rituals of other religions, as far as I know. Yeah. And he was a Hindu to his core, really. But this aspect, which is very appealing to the modern West as well, is emphasized. Now, I've heard it said that Hindus and Muslims are two of the hardest people to convert to Christianity. Muslims because of their strictness and their kind of like fanaticism and their like intensity of like, which, for someone who's right is correct. You know? Sure. And Hindus because they're so open. Hinduism is not a coherent religious system. It's a collection of a bajillion cults and then a bunch of different schools of philosophy laid on top of those. So, when you get Westerners saying, well, I just take whatever, I can from different religions, they might not be practicing like rites of any one religion. Gandhi was a Hindu. That's like fundamental to Hinduism. Like, and some people who've even grown up in Indian culture have said that like self-contradiction is like pretty core to being like
I have a friend who's Indian. He was born in the United States, but his parents came over from India, and he's described this to me about how there were these efforts to evangelize and convert the Hindu people by the British colonists, and that in a lot of instances, what may have on the surface looked like success actually wasn't at all, because it was like, yeah, sure, we'll worship like your Jesus and Mary or whatever. But yeah, he mentioned to me that his father, who's Hindu, has framed pictures of Jesus and Mary in their home.
Yeah, Gandhi had a picture of
grew
Jesus
up with that
as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's like an openness that like kind of makes it difficult to commit and to renounce.
Right.
Right. So Gandhi had the enlightened condescension towards Christianity, of an enlightened man, enlightened, open-minded man. He didn't want to sort
member of the Roman Curia.
He wasn't trying to like sort of like overtly discourage Christian missionaries and stuff, but he definitely was very much against the idea that converting to Christianity as an Indian meant that you would have to dress like a Westerner and adopt Western customs and everything. And in that, obviously, he's correct. He says, he has a specific line. He said, conversion must not mean denationalization. He says, conversion should mean a definite giving up of the evil of the old, adoption of all the good of the new, and a scrupulous avoidance of everything evil in the new. Conversion, therefore, should mean a life of greater dedication to one's country, greater surrender to God, greater self-purification. So that's all true in itself, but, Gandhi definitely, like, plays a role in this attitude you find today among many Indians that is, like, essentially similar in a way to, what Malcolm X might have said, which is that it's like the white man's religion.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Gandhi was more open to it as like a moral system, as a ideal of life, but he felt that, it could not make this claim, this like exclusive claim.
Yeah.
So that's, so that part of his view is emphasized in the movie, but his Hindu-ness is very de-emphasized.
Yes.
We basically see him doing virtually nothing specifically Hindu, other than like we see him doing specifically Indian things.
Right.
We see the reenactment of his marriage ceremony. We never see him worshiping. We never see him,
praying. Like we see the aftermath of prayer. Like, oh, are you guys done praying?
It's also been pointed out that we hardly ever see him thinking through difficult issues. We don't see much internal conflict in him at all. We see him only after he's had the epiphany.
Wonders how he got to be so wise. He just like in every situation in this film has like the wise path charted.
Right. He's just slightly clueless at the beginning in the train sequence when he gets kicked off the train in South Africa. He's like doesn't seem to like know that racism exists. But so all of that is there, and so you can see how it is emphasized. The film is bringing across things that are part of Hinduism, that are part of the East. But as I said before, or as you said, it's also kind of isolating them and idealizing them from a Western perspective and leaving out the actual like the rites, the cult,
sure,
yeah, and so,
I mean, anytime God is spoken of in this film, it is
spoken of as though it's just God, it's the same God,
right?
Unlike what Richard Grenier says, Rama is not the same as God,
right?
Basically, you don't hear anything about the different Hindu deities or anything like that.
Yeah.
So. And not from Gandhi. I just think it's just doesn't come up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a priest character, an Anglican minister who's kind of a companion of Gandhi's in the early years, and even there, like it's kind of this non-specific, like
the word caste is, I believe, I don't know if it's used once in the film. If it is, it's hardly at all.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's very little mention.
I think the word untouchables is mentioned
a couple times.
But it's not really given any context.
So like you can argue that the India of this film is like not very Indian.
Yes. Right.
It looks like India. There's a bunch of people wearing Indian clothes.
Yeah.
There's like some vaguely poor looking people,
Right, that's a good
there's
point.
dudes with funky beards.
Yeah.
There's very little of real Indian culture on a deeper
Right,
level
sure.
in this.
Yeah, especially religiously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to see how that's not a criticism of this film, you know?
Yeah.
On the other, there's another aspect to it which has been pointed out by some critics, which is that this film focuses almost exclusively on Gandhi as a political leader.
Okay,
rather than as a holy man and on his like interior life.
I see.
So
Yeah.
that's part of why it's able to do these things, to leave these other things out.
Right.
But it also, but it can't help but falsify both. So people may not know that Gandhi was actually not completely committed to nonviolence. It was like situational for him, and he went back and forth within like short periods of time in his approach on this. In the Indian context, he was largely pro nonviolence within India, but he was not. He was very much considered himself a patriotic subject of the British Empire for many years. In World War I, he was trying to form a company to go over and fight.
Wow.
And he did fight. I mean, he won like the war medal from the British government.
Really?
At one point.
Wow.
Yeah. Not. I don't think it was World War I. I can't remember. But so maybe we can start at the beginning. So we get this opening scene where he is in South Africa on a train, and he gets kicked off the train because he's Indian.
Yeah.
So he's there. He gets kicked off the train. He's all shocked and appalled. And you see him essentially fighting. He's shown almost to be fighting for just racial equality in general.
Right.
So and there's shots of, you see scenes of Black South Africans sort of reacting and looking inspired, or okay, so there's a couple things to be said for this. First of all, Gandhi did not really care about the situation of Black South Africans. So I want to read a little bit of commentary. This is from a negative review of the film in The Telegraph, written by Patrick French. So he's okay. In fact, Gandhi's demand to be allowed to travel first class was accepted by the railway company. He was not kicked off the train. There's debate over what actually happened in this situation.
Okay.
Because Gandhi seems to have given conflicting accounts of it. But rather than marking the start of a campaign against racial oppression, as legend has it, the episode was the start of a campaign to extend racial segregation in South Africa. Gandhi was adamant that respectable Indians should not be obliged to use the same facilities as the raw Kafirs, whatever. That's a slur for South African blacks. He petitioned the authorities in the port city of Durban, where he practiced law, to end the indignity of making Indians use the same entrance to the post office as blacks, and counted as a victory when 3 doors were introduced: one for Europeans, one for Asiatics, and one for natives. Now, Richard Grenier points out another angle of this. This scene on the train was in 1893. And at this time, Gandhi was a pretty conventional caste Indian. He did not really start questioning the caste system until about 30 years after that, and arguably he never fundamentally questioned it. Grenier points out that the Indian caste system was way more harsh, way more stratified, and way more oppressive than the thing that Gandhi protests, which is, in one part of the film, which is all the Indians in South Africa having to carry special identification.
Right.
So to portray him as a champion of racial egalitarianism, sort of
Kind of.
full stop,
Yeah.
in South Africa or anybody else, is ridiculous.
Right.
Because Gandhi didn't have a problem with the Indian caste system at this time.
Yeah.
And, there was all sorts of things you had to do to purify yourself if you came in within a certain
Right.
64 feet of this caste or 18 feet of this caste, and it was
Right.
just crazy. So, he was fighting in South Africa to have, and this part is reflected in the film, to have Indians recognized as loyal subjects of the empire, which I think was a great strategy,
Sure.
to be honest.
Sure.
It's also very interesting that we get the impression, just as a side note, that the people in England are more sympathetic to this than the people in South Africa, which seems to be like a constant theme because in history, because in colonial history, because we see this with the Spanish in Spanish colonialism, for instance. It's the people on the ground in South Africa. A lot of them are South America, mistreating natives and in the Caribbean. And it's in Spain that the Spanish crown is forbidding slavery.
Right.
And expounding on the rights of the natives and stuff, but it's at a distance from what's actually happening.
Yeah.
It's that's kind of interesting in itself.
Right.
But he in fact during one of the Kaffir Wars in South Africa, Gandhi volunteered to organize a brigade of Indians to put down a Zulu uprising and was decorated for valor under fire. He was.
I would like to see that in the movie.
Yeah, Sergeant Major Gandhi, Grenier says, was awarded Victoria's coveted war medal. He had most of his life a huge admiration for British soldiers, their sense of duty, their discipline, their stoicism, that is completely left out of the film. I think you can see that he has some respect for the British in certain ways.
Sure.
But so it's very interesting, and he keeps going back and forth in life between sort of pacifism and between different attitudes towards the British Empire. In 1915, he was trying to form a regiment to go help the Empire fight Germany. And he said in 1950, "I discovered that the British Empire had certain ideals with which I have fallen in love." And he also said to somebody in a letter to the Viceroy, "I would make India offer all her able-bodied sons as a sacrifice to the empire at this critical moment." But just a couple of years later, when he, Grenier, I don't know if this is accurate, and I'll say Grenier's essay is clearly slanted.
Sure.
He's a neocon. He has his own political agenda.
Sure.
But there's a lot in it that holds up. So a couple of years later, Grenier depicts him as a leader in search of a cause. And he decides his cause will be home rule for India. So shortly after, all this high praise of the empire, he says the British Empire today represents Satanism, and they who love God can afford to have no love for Satan. He sort of goes back and forth on all this stuff. During the rioting in Calcutta, he gave his approval to men using violence in a moral cause. He blessed the Nawab of Malakotla when he gave, I don't know what any of that means, by the way. He gave orders to shoot 10 Muslims for every Hindu killed in his state. So he was a very contradictory and inconsistent man. I'm not trying to demonize him in any way. But
that's not what's articulated in this film.
Yeah, and also, the less attractive aspects of pacifism are not depicted. We see a little bit of it, maybe a little bit of naivete when he's talking about how to fight Hitler with nonviolence.
Right.
But Gandhi late in his life...
But honestly, even there, the film doesn't really... Sorry to jump in, but even in that moment, the film isn't really condemning. Like, we don't have any reason to...
It's not condemning him. I would just say it's exposing something that you could reasonably expect that an American audience, even sucked into this movie, would be like, I don't know if that'll work.
Yeah, but he makes a good point. Like the film doesn't really offer us. There's no evidence to suggest that the film disagrees with what he espouses in that moment.
Yeah,
he says, yeah, there's going to be pain and suffering, but is there not already pain and suffering in this war?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh yeah,
sure.
Oh man, yeah, that's right.
So Gandhi thought that the way the Jews should deal with the Holocaust is to commit collective suicide, that they should offer themselves up to the rifles of the Germans or throw themselves off cliffs into the sea.
Yeah.
And at different points, but even there, he went back and forth. He kept going back and forth between advocating nonviolence and armed resistance. He sort of supported the Polish resistance at a certain point. One of the things Grenier really attacks him for is just having an opinion on everything.
Yeah.
Thinking he was right about everything. But he wrote an open letter to the British people advising them to surrender their island to Hitler.
Wow.
And then he wrote a letter to Hitler appealing him to embrace all mankind of every religion, race, and creed. He also caused serious problems for British attempts to defend India from Japanese invasion during the war. He organized non-violent resistance against the British at different points, which caused serious issues, and even advocated that the best way to fight the Japanese would to be just let them take everything, come into India and take everything, but let them feel unwanted there.
Yeah.
But Gandhi, late in life, did admit that ahimsa, this nonviolence resistance, could be used against a fundamentally moral nation like Britain,
right?
But that it wouldn't have an effect.
That's right.
With everybody.
That's right.
And in fact, we see that it doesn't have. His hunger strike might have had an effect, but nonviolent resistance didn't really come into play when Indians were slaughtering each other.
Right.
You know, in this movie, we see the British. We see a lot of talk about, you know, India being a unified nation. But India never had unity as a nation before the British.
Yeah.
There's talk about the British sort of say they want to stay to protect the rights of religious minorities in India. Well, there's something to that, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And the fact is, what happened, Gandhi kind of like said, like, well, that's our problem.
Right.
But what in fact happened, and this is, you know, shown in the movie, is that a few million people were killed.
Yeah.
In Hindus, I think it was, I forget if it was Hindus and Sikhs versus Muslims or Muslims and Sikhs versus Hindus, but there was mass violence. 15 million people were displaced in the partitioning of India and Pakistan. And there were at least 1 million or 2, some people say as many as 4 million people killed.
Yeah.
In fighting and rioting. And so, you know, it just kind of goes to show you that, like, Gandhi's, you know, his pacifism, he wasn't, well, first of all, he wasn't a complete pacifist, but his ideals are very admirable, and the way that he carried them out in situations where it was prudent to carry them out.
Right.
You can't help but admire him.
Sure.
You can't call him a coward.
Right.
You can't call him a lily liver.
Right.
You know, you can't help but admire his courage. You can't help but admire his stoicism.
Right.
His willingness, and the fact that he was able to convince people at various points to stage nonviolent mass resistance, even when being beaten and stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. But the fact is that it doesn't always work, and this movie kind of implies that this ideal is a universal one that can be applied in every situation.
Yeah, well, you know, there's this key scene where Gandhi organizes a march on this British-run salt works, and British soldiers, police officers are stationed outside, and the Indians who have gathered to demonstrate and march on the salt works are just marching up in rows, sort of row by row, to get beaten with clubs by these guards who are protecting the entrance. And it's very moving because one by one they're walking forward totally courageously. You know, it's really Christ, you know, turning the other cheek, as in, like, you know, keeping your head up and letting it be struck. But that kind of resistance only works against a power who values your life, right? Who, like, respects the dignity of human life and isn't going to just gun you all down and then execute you for being a political dissident and then put the whole thing behind them, right? So this kind of resistance only works in an already fundamentally moral system, right? Something also worth reflecting on, given the kind of political turmoil that's happening in the West today, when there's, like, so much, you know, that's decried as systemically unjust or, you know, oppressive. It's like, well, you know, if this was North Korea, this little demonstration would lose all of its efficacy, you know, because you would all be dead and it would never be reported on, and it might as well never have happened, right? So yeah, that's a kind of naivete that I resent in political discussions now, and to whatever degree to which it's like
Yeah.
part of this film's like main point, I resent it too. You know, if it's an uncomplicated advocacy of this sort of pacifism as a universal moral value, then I'm sorry, like I have to take issue with that.
Yeah, going back to the British, I think it's like fighting for independence is a good thing, but like, you can also look at Gandhi's the way that he helped to improve Indian society. He did improve the situation of the untouchables. He didn't fundamentally challenge the caste system, but he did improve the situation of the untouchables. But, Grenier points out that the British like improved people's situation even more when they abolished sati in 1829, which was the practice all across India of men's wives having to throw themselves upon their husband's funeral pyre and die with them.
Yeah.
So you always get the impression in this film too that Indian poverty was caused by Britain,
right?
Like because they did do things like have a monopoly on salt production and on like cloth making and things like that. So those obviously were oppressive and hurting the Indians economically, but there's no indication that like the indication is almost that like India's problems are all just a result of colonialism.
Right.
So there's also a depiction of the founding of Pakistan, which like, I don't know who's right, but some people have claimed that their depiction of the founder of Pakistan, Jinnah, is very like
he looks like a Marvel supervillain.
He's very demonized.
Yeah,
you can say it's very one-sided at the very least.
He's like a Bond villain in this movie,
right?
He's got like this like
he has the most correct British accent of any of them.
Yeah. He's got this dash of white hair in his hair that's always slicked back, and he's got this kind of furrowed brow, and he's always disagreeing with Gandhi.
So you can see the agenda of the English government in this. Sure. Random side note, James. Did you know that Gandhi was influenced by Chesterton?
No.
He actually was influenced. We were talking about the terms under which India gained its independence, right?
Yeah.
And Chesterton had written a column or two in his, I want to say like London Daily Mail or whatever he wrote for weekly, saying like if India becomes independent, it shouldn't just be like in a British style culturally, and like its governance should be Indian.
Yeah,
not just like ethnically, but in its cultural and in its spirit. And Gandhi was very much inspired by that, which is kind of interesting. He was also big into Tolstoy, who was also a pacifist. And I believe he was influenced by Thoreau as well, his civil disobedience essay.
Sure.
So the Western influence on Gandhi, I would say, is actually pretty well portrayed in this film, which is kind of interesting in itself. So we talked about sort of the Gandhi's ideals. I think that just to point out a couple other areas where they left things out that Western audiences would not be able to stomach.
Yeah.
So they do mention his like vow of chastity.
Yeah.
That he made without his wife's consent.
Right.
This was one-sided.
Yeah.
There's a big thing in Hinduism about retaining your bindu. If you've ever seen the film Dr. Strangelove, where there's the one officer who's really concerned about not losing any of his precious bodily fluids, and that's like a joke throughout the film that he has this like maniacal obsession with like retaining his bodily fluids. That's a big thing in Hinduism. They have this like they really believe that if like your seed goes out of you, then you like lose strength and vitality. Also, Gandhi was at his father's deathbed at a young man, and he was there in the afternoon. And he left to go have sex with his wife, and while he was away, his father died. And he was like never able to disassociate sex from guilt.
That's so heavy.
Yeah. Wow. So Gandhi made this vow of chastity after being married for 24 years and having some kids. At the same time that he made the vow of chastity, he forced his young sons to commit to lifelong chastity as well. And he disowned his older son for wanting to marry. And then he banished the younger son like from his presence when he wanted to give financial support to the older son. The older son ended up converting to Islam and like having problems with women and then becoming an alcoholic and dying in his like 40s or something.
Yeah, see, man,
and
that's
then Gandhi
rough.
wrote a little thing about like how your children disappoint you sometimes.
Yeah, well, and then that's just like, ain't that just how it is? Like I have so little trust or esteem for any like so-called father of a nation if he couldn't keep it together with his own family. You know what I mean? Like that's such a big deal. And I think that, you know, like in American politics today, it's like we totally make that mistake of overlooking, you know, the quality of a man's leadership of his own family when considering him for leadership positions in the social order, right?
Yeah. So the other things that would probably particularly upset even a director trying to film this would be Gandhi's obsession with bowel movements. Gandhi was obsessed with like the health of people's bowel movements. He would inquire after he would give all of these like enemas to all the people who lived in his ashram, including like young girls, and like he would have them administer an enema to him. And he would also in preparation to steel his resolve for his confrontation with Jinnah over some issue, he slept nude with a bunch of teenage girls in his ashram to test his moral resolve of chastity. So
yeah,
like this was a weird guy.
Yeah.
Like
right.
Not judging, but like
a little bit judging.
But this is a weird guy, and the point is not so much that we have to reject Gandhi and not admire him in any way, as that like this movie just totally like westernizes him. In many ways.
Right. And you know, and that's probably why it's on the Vatican film list, right? Because probably that's the Gandhi we want to remember. We want this kind of Western ideal of the syncretistic, pacifist, New World Order kind of hero.
The closing words of the film, one of the few, Gandhi says a lot of cool stuff in this movie. I don't like the line where he talks about tyrants throughout history always losing, because it's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Yeah.
Usually one tyrant is replaced with another.
Right.
That's the norm historically. I do believe we get a happy ending eventually.
Right.
You know,
but it comes with the end of the world.
Yeah.
You know, it comes with apocalypse.
So this kind of like happy clappy, like good and love always wins, you know, throughout history.
Is crap.
That's true in like there's like certain like limited areas in which that's true maybe, but like in terms of no, like and look, here's one of the big things that Richard Grenier points out in his essay, which is that like what happened after Gandhi, like the Indian, like one notable thing about the relationship of the Indian nation with Gandhi is that they did not listen to him in any respect. They didn't practice, the Indian nation didn't adopt nonviolence.
Yeah.
They didn't adopt any form of whatever limited form of egalitarianism.
Right.
You know,
right.
Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like there's no respect in which India like adopted nonviolence as an ideal.
Right.
So, you know, even in that respect, Gandhi was just like, he did achieve Indian, by general consensus, he helped to achieve Indian independence, but like,
right.
What else? What came after him? Just like a regular nation, not necessarily a worse nation than any other, but not a better nation either.
Right.
So like the words really ring hollow.
Yeah.
When you think about that.
And I was reading even like in the wake of his death, how his life and image was really just used by the new government to kind of shore up their power and to silence political opposition.
I don't think there's any reason to believe that the Indian government, since it gained its independence, is better than the British Empire.
Sure.
Is more moral than the British Empire. It might be better that it's an Indian government. That is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I'm just talking about its moral status. I'm not questioning the legitimacy, the admirable ideal of independence and home rule. That's all great stuff.
Right.
But I'm just the deeper moral thing that Gandhi said he was so concerned about.
Right.
You know, you don't see that really bearing much fruit.
Yeah.
that's partially because, I mean, look at Christ. I mean, there's plenty of bad things that have happened since he came, but I think that his ideal has been more lasting in its effect. I mean, heck, his ideal, Christ's words influenced Gandhi pretty heavily.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably as much as anything in Indian religion,
Yeah.
So, the fruitfulness of the lasting fruitfulness of Gandhi's life, I think, is in question, regardless of how admirable he may have been. Let's close with a bunch of white women who add nothing.
Right. So that was, dear listener, if you've made it this long, you were
a bunch of white women who add nothing.
You were teased at the beginning that this was at the top of the notes, and here it is.
So this film shows us Gandhi's relationships with other people, the way he interacts with the rest of the world, very much in terms of his interaction with non-Indians.
Yeah. Both
politically on a mass scale and with individuals. So it just throws in this minister, that's fine. He had plenty of Christian missionary friends and stuff. But it also just throws in these white journalists, as though his most intimate moments were shared by a New York Times reporter. This is what I'm just echoing Grenier's criticism, nothing original, but he, this woman, we get this Margaret Bourke White or whatever, this woman who comes in whose role is completely pointless in my opinion at the end, and yet she gets second billing to Ben Kingsley in the credits, whatever her name is. She just photographs him. She doesn't really play any important role. My least favorite is his white woman follower,
right?
Who seems totally awkward,
right?
Yeah.
Based on a real person.
Person who was a spiritual, not spiritualist, but a spiritual seeker who spent a lot of time, many years traveling around trying to commune with the spirit of Beethoven before she fixated on Gandhi.
Yeah.
Then she went to Gandhi. She was so annoying that he did everything he could to avoid being around her. And finally she left and went back to Beethoven and said, "Don't talk to me about the Mahatma anymore. I'm all about Beethoven." So,
but in this film, it's she's his daughter. She supplants all of his other relationships.
Yeah. By the way, we don't see just going back to his sons. We don't see his sons at all.
Yeah.
After their children.
Right.
We don't see them as adults, and that's because he had a crappy relationship with his sons when they were adults.
Yeah.
So
my wife was even mentioning that when we were watching it. She was like, "Whatever happened to his children? How come we don't see his children?"
Yeah, he disowned one of them for wanting to get married.
Very alert of you, dear wife.
Yes. So this was a longer episode than usual, and we talked less about this film's artistic qualities than we usually do.
But I mean, what are you going to say? It's a good movie. It's you've seen this movie before. If you've seen any of these Oscar-worthy biopics,
right?
If you want to pick up some ammo for how to think about non-cooperation of vaccine mandates or how to organize a collective burning of vaccine passports. Although nowadays it would be digital, so we wouldn't even be able to do something epic cast it into a fire.
To burn something digitally means to reproduce it, and copy it,
right? And maybe I will be reproducing a vaccine passport if it comes to that.
So. Yeah, so it's an enjoyable movie, certainly well crafted. Great performance by Ben Kingsley. That'd probably be a good reason for any actor to watch it.
Yeah.
Definitely shouldn't be on the Vatican film list.
But, the words of Gandhi probably shouldn't even be on the lips of anybody in the Vatican. Stop it. Forget it.
Yeah, Gandhi's cool. Gandhi's cool. I love Malcolm X. He had some weird qualities, but just don't be a boomer,
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have no idea what's coming next.
Probably a Decalogue movie. I don't know. Maybe.
We'll do Decalogue 7 probably next. We're really on the tail end of this Decalogue now.
Yeah, we've got 7, 8, 9, 10. So four more. We're over the hill
for sure.
Yeah.
And I remember least about these next few episodes, so I'm kind of most excited to see them again.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks. This was fun. Thanks everybody for listening. So if you want to subscribe to the YouTube channel, that'd be great. If you want to donate us some money,
That'd be better.
that'd be great. But if you really want to do it, you can figure out the link for yourself. If you really care, you'll figure out what the donate link is yourself. You don't need me to tell you. You'll guess. You'll guess until you get it right. See you later.